Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here at 3TR here to give you another awesome gaming rankings list to share with you guys today. This particular list was requested by one of my viewers, and he asked if I could do a ranking video going over the entire Batman Arkham Games series. Now, before we jump into my list, I would really appreciate if you could press one of the links in the description down below to follow me on Twitter or follow me on Facebook or to follow me on Twitch so you can keep track of me in my future videos and updates. And if you have any ideas that you would make for great videos, that will be the best place to send your ideas because that's kind of the place I'm most active the most. So before I jump into my list, I would just like to state right now that I haven't played all of them. I think I've played all of the console Arkham games, and I think I've only dabbled a little bit into the Vita games. I think there's only like one or two of them, but I don't think I recall finishing them. So with that said, let's jump right into the list, starting off with the only one that I never actually finished, but I would rank it without question the lowest on my list, starting off with number 5. Before I start my list, I would just like to clarify that just like the majority of my other worst to best list videos, when it comes to the Arkham series, I personally do not see any of them as being bad games in any way. There are just some that I would prefer over others. And to give everyone a heads up, this list will not be including the titles Batman Return to Arkham because I don't count remasters, Batman Arkham City Lockdown because I could never play it, and Batman Arkham VR because I'm not a fan of VR gaming in general, and therefore I didn't want to play this. So with that out of the way, let's start off with number 5. Number 5 on my list, and my least favorite entry in the Batman Arkham franchise, has to go to Batman Arkham Origins BLACKGATE, that was originally released back in 2013 and was developed by Armature Studios for both the Nintendo DS and the PlayStation Vita. Now, the story takes place about 3 months after the events of Batman Arkham Origins, and since then Batman has really built up his reputation and is now feared by most of the criminal underworld. During one night, Batman meets Catwoman for what I believe was actually the very first time in the Arkham timeline, as she's stealing some data from the Omega Squad of the Department of Extra-Normal Operations, but managed to capture her, letting the Gotham City Police Department take Catwoman into BLACKGATE custody. But sometime later, a riot takes place at the prison, and now Batman must find his way into BLACKGATE and now team up with Catwoman in order to save the hostages and prevent the villains like the Joker, Black Mask, and the Penguin from escaping. Now, overall, Arkham Origins BLACKGATE is by no means a bad game, but just more or less underwhelming. The story's cutscenes are not told in a cinematic fashion, but more told with the use of a semi-motion comic book art style that I personally wasn't a fan of. The gameplay tries to capture the style of the Arkham games, but it does it in a side-scrolling beat-em-up kind of way. The combat is very slowed down and delayed, and it lacks the speed for which we know Batman is capable of fighting, and as a side-scroller it just feels so out of place. The game also is much linear, with the additions of allowing Batman to move back and forth between the background areas in order to explore. There's also a stealth element added here, but just like the combat, it feels out of place for a side-scroller. Now, I only played this on the Vita, so I can't speak for how this game operates on the Nintendo DS, but I have to imagine that some of the gameplay mechanics feel a little bit awkward having to work with 2 screens. Out of all of the Arkham game titles on this list, this was the only one that I never was able to finish. The story, from what I was able to experience, was very uninteresting, with no amount of character development for anyone, and it even managed to make the interactions between Batman and Catwoman boring. And though I will give the developers credit for trying their best to bring over many elements from the main Arkham games, it just seems that in an overall sense they just weren't able to pull this off and were a bit too ambitious trying to bring it over to the portable systems. And for that reason, Batman Arkham Origins BLACKGATE is my least favorite entry in the series. Now, when it comes to spots 4 and 3 on my list, I believe that these 2 entries will be the most debated upon in the comments down below. And despite having the best trailers and having some of the best quality promotions that I've ever seen for a game leading up to its release, Batman Arkham Origins has to take the number 4 spot on my list. For me at least, Origin feels like a watered down version of Arkham City that tries very little to make it stand apart from the rest of the installments, and what new things they do try don't really add up to much, and if anything, make the game significantly easier, but not in a good way. One of the biggest crimes that this game comes up with is the name itself, in the title Arkham Origins, as this game has absolutely nothing to do with the plot. The aspects of Arkham plays absolutely no part to anything that happens in this game. The game's plot takes place near the beginning of Bruce Wayne's career as the Dark Knight, as he is trying to build up his reputation as a crime fighter, but he manages to find out that the crime lord Black Mask has placed a bounty out on him, which causes Batman to have to contend with a number of highly dangerous criminals like Deathstroke, Bane, and even the Joker, all in one night. Now, while Arkham Origins gameplay-wise plays exactly like the rest of the entries in this franchise, timeline-wise there are some serious inconsistencies. For starters, why does this Batman seem far more effective and have a far better collection of gadgets than he ever did in both Arkham Asylum and Arkham City? This is supposed to take place several years before either of those games ever happen, and yet he is far more effective in this game as both a combatant and as a detective. This game also makes the same mistake that many campaign-driven franchises have made in creating a multiplayer mode that adds absolutely nothing to the overall experience and feels completely unnecessary. Character-wise, Origins does do a good job in establishing the personality of Bruce Wayne as a character and establishing his relationship with characters that will become his long-standing allies. A few of the boss fights throughout the game are some of the best throughout the entire franchise, and the voice acting for a majority of the cast feels spot on, portraying significantly younger versions of characters that we have come to know. Overall, while Arkham Origins still can be a very enjoyable game, the fact that this and its portable counterpart are the only installments not to be developed by Rocksteady Studios really shows that Armature Studios just can't seem to capture the same level of quality and diversity that Rocksteady has been known to achieve, and that's why it is in the number 4 spot on this list. Number 3 on my list is the epic conclusion to the Arkham series, that being Batman Arkham Knight. This installment is without question the best looking Batman game visually ever made, and has the largest additions of gameplay elements and mechanics that we have ever seen, and there are some people out there who seem to have a problem with that. The game takes place sometime after the death of the Joker, and with the Joker gone, Scarecrow manages to unite the majority of Batman's enemies, along with receiving aid from a mysterious person calling himself the Arkham Knight and his private military force, and manages to spread a new fear toxin that is so dangerous that a majority of the Gotham City civilization population has to be evacuated, leaving it completely taken over by the criminals. With such a catastrophic event threatening the entire city, Batman was now fight alongside his allies Nightwing, Robin, and even Catwoman, along with the last remnant of the Gotham City Police Department, to find a way to stop Scarecrow, defeat the Arkham Knight, and reclaim the city before it's too late. I stated this in my review for Arkham Knight that I personally view this as the Dark Knight Rises of the main trilogy of Rocksteady Batman Arkham games. It may be the most flawed entry out of the 3, but it is still a great addition to the franchise with a satisfying ending to the series. Everything is improved upon for the most part in this game, with the only real issues that I ever had with this game being that there are some serious pacing issues with the game's primary story and the underuse of specific characters that I believe should have played a much more significant role in the main story. The combat has been enhanced to such a great level that it was certainly needed, as the entire city has now become one big battleground, and instead of being locked up in a cage like something like Arkham City, it now feels like an all-out war with all kinds of enemies spread throughout the city. Making your way through the city becomes a much more thrilling experience than ever before, especially with the inclusion of the Batmobile. Now, I've heard a lot of people complain about the Batmobile and how they could never get it to work, or the fact that you had to spend practically half the game in it, but for me, I enjoyed absolutely every second that I was in it. In fact, the addition of the Batmobile added some of the most unique additions to gameplay that were ever added to this series, with the inclusion of a chase sequence, tank battles, and even the use of some creative Riddler puzzles spread throughout the city. The addition of being able to fight alongside your allies and being able to switch between them in the midst of combat was an incredible gameplay mechanic, which I would love to see again if we just so happen to get another Spider-Man game that lets us play as both Peter and Miles within the same vicinity. What the game gets right for the most part is really giving you a real serious sense of finality and testing our characters in ways that they have never experienced before. And despite its flaws, it is still one of the greatest Batman games ever made, which is why it takes a number 3 spot on my list. Number 2 on my list is going to go to Batman Arkham City. And just like its sequel, it improved upon nearly every aspect of its predecessor, but simply takes place in a much wider and expanded area. Taking place 1 year after the events of Arkham Asylum, and shortly after Bruce Wayne is thrown into Arkham, which has now been expanded to such a degree that it has taken over a section of Gotham City, he is injected with some of the Joker's blood, who is now dying due to the negative effects of Bane's Venom serum, and now must team up with Catwoman to not only find a cure to the venom that is slowly killing him, but must confront Dr. Hugo Strange, who has managed to discover Batman's true identity, is preparing to initiate something called Protocol 10. Now, while being able to play as Nightwing, Robin, and Catwoman was relatively limited throughout Arkham Knight, and Arkham City being able to play as both Batman and Catwoman and being able to explore all of Arkham City allows you to explore the city in 2 different ways, and there are several locations and even missions that are exclusive to each character, with Catwoman surprisingly being granted a good amount of story missions, granting her a solid amount of character development, which was seriously absent in Arkham Knight. The combat is just as fluid as it has ever been at this point, and with both characters having their own unique fighting style, it encourages you to really replay certain missions and even test out your skills in the much more expanded upon combat challenge modes that this game provides. Where I believe this game is most heavily flawed is only in its 3rd act of the story. The pacing throughout most of the game is handled perfectly, but over the last hour or 2 of the game, it seems to wrap things up way too quickly, with multiple revelations happening all at once, and none of them are really given much time to sink in. And even by the ending's shocking conclusion, even that moment is significantly downplayed, but that still does not prevent this game from being my 2nd personal favorite entry in the franchise. Number 1 on my list has to go to the one game that started it all, and that being the original Batman Arkham Asylum. Now, while both Arkham City and Arkham Knight did a fantastic job improving upon every single gaming aspect that was started here in Arkham Asylum, it just seems to me that as these games expanded upon and got bigger, flaws start to appear that were never present in Arkham Asylum, making Arkham Asylum the far most focused entry in the entire franchise. The game's plot was very simple and easy to follow. After bringing Joker to Arkham Asylum, he manages to quickly take control of the asylum and releases all of the prisoners, and it is now up to Batman to fight his way throughout the facility to take down the Joker. Batman Arkham Asylum is not just my favorite installment in the franchise, it managed to revolutionize a genre of gaming to such a degree that even after all of these years, even by 2018, many comic book related games are still taking inspiration from Arkham Asylum in terms of its gameplay, story presentation, voice acting, performances, etc. I also think that Arkham Asylum is the only installment that executes the concept of what Arkham really means to the overall lore of Batman, and not just the game, but in the comics, with the game's plot taking heavy inspiration from the legendary Arkham Asylum Serious House on Serious Earth graphic novel, and just the atmosphere and how it affects Batman the longer he is there is presented perfectly here. The Easter eggs and callbacks to the history of the Batman lore throughout the comics is perfectly placed throughout the facility, encouraging the player to explore and discover its secrets. Because of its flawless nature and giving me the perfect experience for what it feels like to play as my all-time favorite comic book hero of all time, not only granted this one of the very few 10 out of 10 scores that I've ever given out, it granted it a legendary status that the mass majority of games, both past and future, could ever even attempt to reach. And for these reasons, that is why Batman Arkham Asylum will always be my favorite entry in the franchise. And that concludes my ranking of the Batman Arkham Games series. So now that you know my list, what is your list? Share your list with me and everyone else in the comments down below. And if you like this video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up to let me know that I did a pretty good job and that you would like to see more videos like this. So with that out of the way, I would like to thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you next time.